So, what happens when we start to feel anxious or have a panic attack? Anxiety is a normal response to stress. It is the body's way of reacting quickly and efficiently to the stresses that build up in our day-to-day life. It evolved in mankind many millions of years ago and came about as a protection when he was a hunter and gatherer. Back in that time, when man was out and there was something seen in the distance, maybe some bushes moving, he didn't have time to stop and think and wonder what it may be. He needed a mechanism that would react immediately and get him out of danger. This mechanism is called the fight or flight response, and it evolved in early man, and it is still part of us now. Although anxiety affects us physically, and we feel that it is in our body, and we experience it that way, it all takes place in the brain. And therefore, to understand what is happening and taking place, we need to take a brief look, and a very simple look, at the brain and what is happening. Here is a very simple image of the brain. As most of you may know, the brain is divided into two halves, two hemispheres. You may also know that these two halves perform different functions. One half, normally the left, is more often connected with logic and reasoning, and the other half is more connected with creative arts, music, and so on. In addition to the two hemispheres, the brain is also made up of a lot of other sections and divisions, all operating at the same time, doing different tasks and communicating with each other. We will also find out later on that we are also made up of lots of parts, all operating at different times. In fact, you already know of one. Anxiety is a part of you. And when anxiety flows into panic, then that part of you starts to take over. As shown on this slide, the brain can be regarded as having been built up in three layers. And these three layers are roughly how the brain has evolved. The first layer, and the oldest part of the brain, is called the reptilian. We will be looking at that in a little bit more detail later on in the course. The next layer is called the limbic system, and we will be spending a bit of time looking at the functions in the limbic system. And the third layer is called the neocortex. The neocortex is probably what we regard as being ourselves, or being us. It is where our logic, reasoning, imagination is stored. And when we are thinking about me and what I'm going to do, a lot of that will be coming from the neocortex. So going back to the limbic system. The limbic system has three components which are shown here: the thalamus, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The thalamus is the part of the brain that receives sensory input from touch, from sight, from taste, and the thalamus sends it to the neocortex, and the neocortex decides what to do with it. The hippocampus has a connection with memory, and in particular the storage of memories. And the final part is called the amygdala. For the rest of this talk, we're going to refer to the amygdala as the fight or flight centre, and it is this part that is crucial to understanding what is happening with anxiety and how and why it takes over from us. We're going to refer to the neocortex as the control centre, which is sufficient for our purposes for now. The hippocampus we're going to refer to as the memory system. The thalamus we're going to refer to as the input system. It will be easier for you to regard these parts as the functions that they perform rather than trying to remember the traditional Latin names. Another important feature about the hippocampus is that it stores its memories in episodes with different sensory input to it. So for instance, if you are out at a meal with friends, then the memory will be stored as different components for sight, for smell, for hearing, and it is different regions of the brain that will handle these. This is important to us because it is these regions and these episodes that get stimulated. As we've mentioned with anchors, a smell or a perfume can take us back to a person or event, and that is because within the memory the episodes are stored as different units of sensory input. We will be using this feature more and more as we learn to overcome the triggers that spark off our anxiety. So this is what normally happens. Sensory input comes in to the input centre. This is passed on to the control centre, and the control centre evaluates it for significance and meaning. If the significance implies danger, then it is passed down to the fight or flight centre. The fight or flight centre accesses memory, and based on this will make a decision. If the danger is real, the fight or flight centre will then take over and will either fight the danger or will run away. Once it has been dealt with, the system then normally returns to an equal state. For day-to-day happenings, this normally happens within 10 minutes or so. But what we now know is the input section has a short circuit to the fight or flight centre. It has a fast track. If the input is really dangerous, it can send information to the fight or flight centre and get it acting a good half second before the control centre knows anything about it. Now, a half second might not seem like a lot, but in the speed that the brain acts, this is a massive amount of time. So let's take a look at how the fight or flight centre takes its action. First of all, it sends our pulse rate up and increases our blood pressure. It needs to get blood around the vital organs and the muscles as quickly as possible. It increases our rate of breathing so that we can get more oxygen into the muscles. It shuts down the control centre. It doesn't want any interference. It has to make some very, very quick decisions and doesn't want debate. It tenses our muscles so that we are ready for action. It dries our mouths and slows down food processing and the actions of our stomachs. And also it makes the decision on what to do, whether to fight or whether to raise the pressure so high that our only option is to run away. So, do these actions start to sound just a little bit familiar?